Hello, everyone, and welcome to the next episode of Talking Acquisition. This is the weekly, high-energy, informative, and slightly opinionated view on all things acquisition, procurement, and government contracting related. This is the place where the contracting and acquisition communities and our industry partners connect, talk, listen, and learn from each other. My name is William Randolph, and I'm your host, and I'd like to introduce my co-host, my colleague, my partner, and my dear friend, Soraya Carrera. Hello, Soraya. How you doing today?
Hello, Will. I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm doing great. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. Hey, I'm excited about our topic today, but before we do that, I'm going to go through my disclaimer.
All right.
Here we go.
Do it.
Our podcast shares information and views on a variety of topics that impact the federal acquisition community. Our goal is to provide thought leadership and perspective, not to criticize, judge, or render political opinions. But as Will said, every now and then some of those will slip out. We provide this free service because we are former federal acquisition professionals and leaders. We believe that the creativity, innovation, and effectiveness of our community is unleashed when we share knowledge, information, and learning. We hope you enjoy our podcast, and we welcome the views and comments of our colleagues across the private and public sectors. And Will, I have to mention that I've gotten quite a bit of feedback. People are listening to our podcast, and some of them are actually enjoying. I had somebody send me a note and said, I laughed at the LPTA one day. Especially the analogy to the dollar store. Nothing against the dollar store, but the analogy was great, I have to admit. But no, it's a lot of fun always doing these podcasts and talking, and I really appreciate the feedback and comments from our audience. And a couple of people have sent us a few topics, but I'm going to let you introduce this week's topic, so go for it.
So I know you had mentioned to me earlier that there was a very interesting article that you had read that talks about something that I think is kind of near and dear to our hearts as well, in talking about pricing. And so I'm gonna throw it back to you and let you talk about from a standpoint of what you read, what you saw, what you read, and let's set it up for the conversation.
Sure. So for most people in our community, there is an organization called the Coalition of Government Procurement. Roger Waldron is a part of that coalition. In fact, I think he stood it up, and he might even be the lead of it. He also has a radio show on Federal News Network, and he writes articles periodically on procurement. I know Roger from Federal Executive Institute, so we go way back to early 2003, excuse me. And so I've talked on his show before, and he just brings great perspectives on the topic of procurement. And he recently had an article. It's called "The Tyranny of Low Price and Other Challenges." It was published, I believe, on December 10th. And basically what he's talking about here, he's a little bit more focused on how GSA prices the schedules, right? The fact that GSA really goes after very deep discounts on the schedules. And his commentary is a little bit about you're pushing for these lower prices, but you're not really putting anything on the table, right? You have the opportunity to get the schedule, agencies can buy from you, but you're not being guaranteed any work, okay? Right. And what he's arguing for, and he cites several areas in the FAR, what he's arguing for is what he's arguing about is that in this day and age where there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, we're dealing with inflation, et cetera, there's a lot of factors that impact pricing. We're asking companies to give these deep discounts initially, and then we can go after more discounts when we go to issue the order. So anyway, so that got me thinking. I'm not going to talk about GSA. They have a formula for what they do. And I don't necessarily always, I agree with his article, by the way. I agree with his commentary about the pricing. But I want to talk about pricing in general, because this ties to the best value and the LPTA discussion that we were having. And, you know, as you and I were commenting earlier, I did do some research in the FAR. Every now and then I do crack open the FAR, you know, because now it's electronic, right? So I go in and I look and I go, let me see if I missed something. Right. And I looked up the word cheap. Do you know that word's not in there?
Imagine that.
It doesn't say, yo, CO, let's go get cheap. It doesn't say that. Yeah. What the FAR talks about, the principles of the FAR, and what I was taught very early in my career through courses that I took, was what we're trying to achieve are what are called fair and reasonable prices, right? Yes. Fair in the sense that it's consistent with the value of the product or service in the market. that it's fair from the perspective that the company makes a certain level of profit, because profit-making institutions need profit to survive. If they don't make a profit, they're not going to be profit-making institutions. They will be
Sure.
out of business. Right?
Right.
So what it talks about is reasonableness and fairness. And it is the job of the contracting officer to try and negotiate what are fair and reasonable prices. And so they have to understand the market, they have to understand the composition of price, the factors that go into the pricing. And last but not least, they have to understand what role competition plays in that. And I say that because sometimes people go to the other extreme and they go, oh, the price is reasonable because there was competition. Well, that's not always true, right? There are circumstances where competition doesn't yield,
Right.
fair and reasonable prices. So I thought we'd talk a little bit today about pricing and how we evaluate prices and what do we mean by the phrase fair and reasonable versus cheap versus I call it superficially low prices, but I love the terminology that Roger used, the tyranny of low price.
Yeah, I get it.
I think he cornered this acronym TLP. We're gonna have to get him on the show.
Absolutely.
I was like, look at that TLP.
Yeah. But yeah, that's been my experience too, Soraya. And I think it started because I had the honor and luxury of starting my career in a systems acquisition organization where we bought stuff, like hardware and boats and ships and planes and stuff like that. And in that environment, my mentors and coaches and instructors and supervisors started from the very beginning as an intern. When I was an intern, they talked about, we're not in the business of negotiating prices. Okay, that's not the business that we're in. We're in the business of negotiating business arrangements.
Right.
Okay, so when you think about it in that context, it almost takes price is a piece of it, but it takes the focus almost exclusively off price. Price is just the manifestation of the business arrangement. So when you think about it in that context, again, I never did the look in the FAR to look for the word cheap, but I believe that it's like there's nothing in the FAR that says wring out all of the dollars and cents out of a deal. It says fair and reasonable, not rock bottom. Okay,
that's cut a deal.
It's not in there. So
it says cut a deal.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Cut a deal, right?
Absolutely.
Right. Fair terms and conditions. I can't talk today. Fair terms and conditions. Specify your requirement, your schedule, define your quality levels, whatever that language you want to use. Yeah. Let's write a contract, and price is one factor in that contract.
Absolutely. Yeah,
so I'm always taken aback when I hear, the contracting officers are trying to beat the contractor down. Now, in fairness, you do get some contractors that try to jack up their prices,
or take advantage,
thinking that you're willing to pay that higher prices. But and you see this a lot in sole source awards. I can't tell you how many times we went from a sole source to a competitive and you see prices drop like 20-30%.
Yeah.
So that there's some cushion in there. That's fair. Now that we're on the other side, we can talk about that, right? We all do it, right? Because you're trying to make money. You're trying to keep a profit-making entity. But the point is, we have to understand the composition of price. It's one of the things I remember my cost and price analysis class that I took it at American University. And I remember we had to be contractors for half the semester, and then the other half of the semester we were the government. And we were actually writing proposals and then negotiating the proposals. And you had to understand the composition of price. What goes into building a price? Yeah. What are those elements of price? And what is a reasonable amount of profit? How do you determine what's reasonable, right? And I think when you get into the commercial pricing side, it's good to lean on competition. There are a lot of tools out there now that tell you what prices should be or could be, right? There's a lot of pricing tools that are out there, that tell you what the commercial marketplace will bear, especially for labor categories. But you got to be careful, because the rate for a category of labor is determined by what you tell them the qualifications are.
Yeah, agreed.
Right? If you're
Yeah.
asking for somebody with 30 years of experience, having done it in private and government, certified out the yin yang with massive degrees, those people cost money.
Yeah, agree. And so Ryan, the thing I have often realized in my private life and have seen now over 25, 26 years of federal acquisition experience, contracting experience, is you get exactly what you pay for.
Exactly.
Okay, exactly. Okay, and I have seen times where the dynamics of the deal of the acquisition were a tight budget situation, and we end up paying more because there's always something later downstream that you got to go back and fix. And if we would have just constructed a deal, constructed an environment that took in consideration all of those things instead of looking for the cheap solution, the cost, the cost had the greatest corollary to what success was, then I hope you got more money downstream because you'll have to go back and fix all of those things. So I think we should be thinking about shifting from this mantra of more for less. We always want more for less. And I'm a big fan of more for this, meaning defining what is the value you're willing to pay. And I'm starting to see in a lot of areas, people are using contracting organizations are using expected and desired cost. They're actually giving people a target to say, look, this is the price of the solution that we're willing to entertain.
Right.
Now go build me a solution that's aligned with this price point. It's an amazing strategy.
Well, one of the things that I often talk about, so people who work for me know I'm a huge proponent of best value. And I'm not saying just best value, like everything should be best value, but value-based approaches to when you're writing your contract. And one of the things that we have to consider, and this is taboo, and I know it's a topic for another podcast, but I'm going to toss this one out there: the contract type. The contract type plays a huge role in pricing. It really does.
Yes.
If you ask a vendor to perform time and materials type work in a fixed price environment, of course they're going to jack up the prices because I don't know what you're up to, right? I can't tell how many times people came up to me and said, this is a firm fixed price contract. It's 1,982 hours times $20 an hour and the total prices. And I'm like, that's called time and materials. That is not fixed price. But unfortunately, we see that because there was a push, probably, I'm going to say, I think it started at the beginning of the Obama administration, maybe a little bit earlier than that. But there was a push to start minimizing what people called high-risk contracts. If you remember this, they called high-risk contracts, and high-risk contracts was anything that wasn't firm fixed price. That's basically. Some people sugarcoated it, right? But it was basically
that's what it is. Yeah.
Right. So then everybody ran, because this is how we do this. We go charging off, and we're going to write everything firm fixed price. And some people got clever and said, well, I'm going to calculate the price by saying X hours times this labor rate, give me Joe Schmo, right? And when they were really buying time and materials. And that's one of the things that leads to these bad pricing scenarios, because companies are being put in a situation where you're going to ask them for a category of labor or a particular skill set and qualifications that maybe that's not what they planned for when they read the solicitation. Maybe that's not what you really clearly specified, but now when they're delivering, you're going, well, wait a minute, I don't like Bobby Joe. Because then that's the other thing that we do. We want to tell the company who to put on the contract, right? And instead of judging the company on who they bring you, right? Evaluate their capability to bring you the right people. Evaluate their capability to provide quality labor. Evaluate their capability to deliver quality products and services. That's what we should be evaluating. And then we should be willing to pay for that capability. It's called value. It's how you buy in your life. You don't go down the phone book and go, ooh, Bobby Joe, plumber extraordinaire, who's only going to charge you $2 an hour, is who's coming to fix your toilet. No, that ain't happening. Right? You're going to look for the guy that has a reputation, that has that really good ad that talks to you and that says, we got, certified plumbers that have been working, wherever doing whatever, right? That's what you're looking for.
Right.
That's value.
Yeah,
That's
agreed.
about value,
Yeah,
right? You're
agreed.
willing to pay a little bit more to get that right guy you're only going to have to pay him once to do the job, and he's going to do the job right. He or she is going to do the job right.
Absolutely. And Soraya, I just want to point out, you did say phone book. I just want to make sure you.
Oh, did I say phone book? Yeah.
No, phone book.
I mean, are you going to Google or Bing?
when we talk about fair, I want to unpack fair and reasonable a little bit. Reasonableness is in the eye of the beholder. I think it's why it's framed that way. It gives some flexibility, if you will, to interpret what reasonable is. But the fair piece is, I think, fair is an understanding of equity, treatment. But I think there's a piece of fair, if you unpack that a little bit, it should be an informed fair. Okay. And here's what I mean by that. Think about the tight labor market that we're in now.
Yep.
What was fair 2 years ago and fair and reasonable 2 years ago might not be what's fair and reasonable today. So if you're using a benchmark of understanding based on a 20-year career or a 15-year career, when there's been something in the marketplace that has influenced what fair could look like and what reasonable could be interpreted to be, we must be informed as a community. We have to understand the market forces at play, the business forces at play, the labor forces at play, maybe even material and infrastructure forces at play. Something in the article that you mentioned talked even about the interest rates that have changed. We have been sub 3% inflation for decades, for a couple decades, and so we grew up. At least me. I'm gonna talk about me. When we talk about inflation rates, and you go to Bureau of Labor Statistics, if someone just naturally threw 3% in there, they're like, wait a minute, we haven't had 3%, inflation in years, and now it's 3.6. I just looked at it this morning.
Right.
It's 3.6% inflation, and it's only going to get worse.
Right.
Or higher. We debate.
That's the projection.
Yeah, that's the projection. So if your fair and reasonableness measure that you have in your head isn't informed by those things that are happening in the environment, in the business environment, in the marketplace, in the world, they could be skewed. And then as a result, your business arrangements could not be those that will be fairly, effectively executed.
Exactly. Well, and then you have to take into consideration the company itself, its capability, right? The capabilities of the company. A small business can deliver the same kind of people really that a large business can. I'm sorry, qualifications are qualifications. The difference is how quickly they can get to them and what they can afford to pay them. Company, when people say to me, well, we want a large business because they can deliver. No, they go out and hire people just like everybody else. The difference is they might be able to pull people off of one contract to put on another. They have more flexibility doing that. That's really the difference. Industry doesn't have a bench sitting around doing nothing, waiting to staff your contract. But back to the concept of fair, you got to think about the company, the industry that you're in. You got to think about the types of businesses that you're working with. And yes, you got to think about the market. Fair is defined by the market. It really is. What is the right price in this market of today for this kind of work in this kind of industry by these types of companies? And a lot of times I don't hear people doing that mental thinking. Yeah. And I want to go back to the fact that there are a lot of tools. There are a lot of organizations that publish labor rates by locality, because that's the other thing. Where you are in the country is a huge factor. If you're living, if you're hiring a labor force here in DC, it's going to cost you a lot more than, I don't know, Michigan. Okay, I'm just going to throw that one out, or even Texas. The big cities like Dallas and New York,
absolutely, Utah, Boise, Idaho,
exactly, are going to be much higher than a Boise, Idaho. That's exactly right. And so these are all the factors. So I think when we talk about price, yes, it's good to look at the forces of competition, but I think you have to delve a little deeper to make sure that you're paying the right price for what you're buying. We talk about fair and reasonable, and unfortunately, I think people have taken fair and reasonable and tried to redefine it as cheap. And I really, really, it upsets me. I think we have to pay the right price for what we're asking for. And you have to take into consideration the contractual arrangement as well. What is the vehicle that I'm asking you to operate under? What are the parameters that I'm trying to get you to work under? What is it I'm trying to get you? And what is it that I value? And that's what best value is all about. What is it that I value? Is it technical? Is it corporate capability? Is it price? Price can be the dominant factor, but you're also going to look at other things in conjunction with price. So when I think of going back to the conversation we had about LPTA, there's nothing wrong with LPTA, excuse me, used under the right circumstances for the right things. I know you're a little bit more emotional about it than I am. I didn't even know that anybody could be more emotional about it than me, right? My staff used to go, well, don't say LPTA to her. They used to run out of the room if they said LPTA. But when I think about this topic, I think about value, and I think about how you define value and how you evaluate that value. And that's a subjective evaluation. You could try to put numbers on it, right? You could try to, quantify it, color it. People use color schemes, adjectival or numbers. You could try to put all that. But at the end of the day, it's the expertise of the evaluators and how they're judging that value. And value is what it means to me, right? So I've seen companies sometimes try to throw things in proposals that they say, this is a value, but they're not things that realistically I could use in my environment. They even really bring value to me because I can't do it. Right. And then they want you to give them credit for it. It's like, no, it doesn't work. So yeah, it's a strength in your proposal. You can do that. That's wonderful, but you can't do it for me. So it's got no value to me. And you'd be surprised how many companies react to that they really think, we'll just pepper the proposal with all these things, and hopefully you'll grab them and say, we're great, wonderful, and give us a contract. And it's like, no, it's got to be a value to me. It's got to be a value to the solution. It's got to be something that makes us better, stronger, gives us greater capability. It's nice to have. We can give you a lot of credit and say you did a great job of thinking of a lot of great ideas. But if that innovation doesn't work for me, it can't. And that takes me to, we got to learn how to define innovation. We say, bring me your most innovative approach. We haven't said what it means. Yeah. So industry is at a loss. When they're trying to reply to us, they go, what are you looking for? Do you want me to turn it on its head? Or are you looking at me to just refine some procedures, right? We have to be clear. That's why I like the affordability option. Because if you give an affordability number, that's what I call that when you give them a target.
Got it. Yeah.
I always call it affordability. It says, here's what I'm willing to pay. This is what I can afford to pay. Because that's really what we talk about, what we're willing to pay. It's really what we can afford to pay based on our budgets, government, right? So when you give that, you're telling them how to start thinking about innovation. It gives them a target. They can start thinking about, here's what's within the realm of the doable. Yeah. The other thing that I think we have to be a little bit better on is defining the parameters of what we're willing to change or not change, right? I remember, and I'm not going to name names, but I worked on one solicitation where a company came in and said, well, if you change the entire structure of the organization, you probably save a lot of money. They were right. They're right. We tossed everything out and started all over from scratch. We could do it far more efficiently. It's not reasonable. That's not realistic, right? But we didn't tell them, don't tell us to turn the organization on its head, right? You have to give a company parameters to be able to define innovation and get that not only put in from a technical standpoint into the system, but then priced properly. Because they are pricing sometimes some of these innovations in there. They really are. Absolutely. I did work on one where the company was saying, well, you could save X amount per year if you incorporate this innovation. Of course, the company was saying, you let us come in from day one and start doing this. And I'm going, guys, that ain't going to happen. Right. It's going to take you a year to figure out what they're asking you to do, one, and convince anybody to try it. Two, there are policy changes that you're going to have to make. And we all know that ain't going to happen real fast. So it's unrealistic to say, yeah, I'm going to take these discounts that you're telling me, 25% per year, whatever the number was, on starting on year one. I'm like, no, that's probably year 2 or 3 out in a contract. But literally, we were ready. People were ready to accept that proposal with those deep discounts in the first. I'm like, that's change order central right there.
Yeah, I agree. Solutions must be able to live in the environment in which they're birthed. That you cannot birth as an analogy, you cannot birth a item, a solution that breathes oxygen and you put it underwater. It's like, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. It has to live in the environment in which is birthed. So I wholeheartedly agree. Well, Soraya, we're at that time.
Wow.
We're a great conversation, and I got so much more I want to talk about, but I think, as we always do, we'd like to leave our community with some nuggets in this space when we're talking about pricing and the dynamics of building business arrangements. So what's your nugget for the day?
So I would say that my nugget is understand all the factors that impact pricing and take them into consideration. All too often, we ignore the contract type, we ignore the parameters or the limitations of the environment in which we're asking the vendor to work. So I think it's extremely important that people go back to basics on pricing and really understand what we mean by fair and reasonable prices, and not be afraid to truly negotiate. I fear that we tend to ask a lot of questions, but we don't tend to really negotiate.
Yeah.
And so what happens is we're just assuming that the competition yielded the right price. And that's not always the case, because if your requirements weren't clear, if you didn't really properly define your terms and conditions, the whole market could be off on the pricing.
Yeah, agreed. I love it. So mine is, profit is not a 4-letter word. Okay. So it
isn't. Right.
It literally isn't.
It's a 6-letter word.
As we think about building business arrangements and understanding that the lifeblood of businesses is the ability to create a profit, that if they were seeking smaller profits, they just put their money in the bank or in a CD somewhere for the return on the capital to run a business. It is expected to run a business, and it's expected to have profit rates that are above what someone could just easily throw their money into the bank or CD or into the stock market. That's the risk, but that's the expected reward. So profit is not a 4-letter word. It's okay. It's okay. And that there's nothing in the FAR that says we got to wring out every nickel and dime into a deal, that somehow results in or equals goodness.
Yeah, profit just has to be reasonable. It has to be the reasonable and the right amount of profit given what you're buying. I agree with you, 100% agree with you. But you're right, the FAR doesn't say not ringing it out. I love that little ringing it out thing. I'm gonna learn that one. Next time we're gonna bring a towel.
Okay, and with that, we've got another episode in the books. Thank you so very much. This has been fun.
Well,
this has been good.
That's been fun.
You got me jazzed up. I'm ready to go now.
Great discussion. And I encourage people to read the article from Roger Waldron, because while it's a little bit more focused on, schedules, GSA pricing, it does make you think about pricing and the context of pricing. And I think it's just a great lesson learned. So thanks to Roger for the great article. And thank you for hosting this week's event.
Right. And thank you for being an amazing co-host. Okay. And with that, we're out. Have an amazing day. Take care. Bye-bye.